My duty was to watch humans in combat, but the memory is something I cannot forget. HFY Reddit. Cathar never expected his assignment to involve humans. In his long career as an observer for the Dominion, he had watched many species fight, each of them predictable in their own way. Some were cautious, relying on heavy machines to do their work. Others fought like insects, swarming in great numbers without thought of survival. The Dominion demanded that he watch, record, and deliver reports that would shape decisions at the highest levels. Cathar had grown used to the pattern. He would sit safely far away, study the warriors, and return with conclusions. There was no glory in his duty, only accuracy. When the order came to observe the human contingent of the coalition front, Cathar felt little more than irritation. The Dominion had only recently accepted humans as allies, and many saw them as little more than noisy primitives who had climbed to the stars too quickly. To Cathar, it felt like a waste of his skills. His kind prided themselves on clarity of mind and discipline in observation. What could these fragile newcomers teach him? Their biology was strange to him: soft flesh, limited lifespans, and minds clouded by emotion. He assumed their ways of war would be crude. Still, orders were orders. He boarded the observation vessel, sleek and silver, and joined the team assigned to orbit near the contested system. The war against the rival species had dragged on for cycles. But this would be his first time watching the humans directly in combat. He expected confusion, perhaps desperation. His notes would show their weaknesses, and the Dominion would file them away. That was all this would be. The first sight of them came through the vessel's viewing glass. On the surface below, the human soldiers gathered at their forward base. Cathar adjusted the focus to study them closely. They did not move like the soldiers he had seen before. There was no silence, no rigid order. Instead, they spoke to each other constantly, their mouths forming words he could not hear but could easily imagine. They clapped each other on the shoulders, shared containers of water, and even laughed. Laughed. On the eve of battle. Cathar frowned, unsure how to note this. To his mind, soldiers should be silent before war, preserving focus. This display felt careless. When the signal came for deployment, he expected their lines to break into confusion. Instead, the humans moved with strange rhythm. They carried heavy packs, weapons slung across their bodies, but they did not appear weighed down. There was something in their posture that confused him. Not pride, not arrogance, but determination. They were not marching because they were ordered to. They were marching because they believed in what they were about to do. Cathar leaned closer to the glass, unsettled. He had seen belief before, but usually it came with fanaticism or blind obedience. The humans looked at each other more than they looked at their commanders. They drew strength from those beside them. He activated the recorders, his duty reminding him not to fall too deep into curiosity. The Dominion required details, not feelings. He noted the humans' use of small rituals before departure. Some tied strips of cloth around their wrists. Others touched small objects around their necks. Several sang quietly as they checked their gear. Cathar had never seen this before. Among his people, soldiers were stripped of personal ties before war. Emotion was seen as weakness. Yet here, humans seemed to carry their emotions like armor. He marked the detail carefully, though his mind lingered on it longer than he expected. The dropships soon carried them toward the battlefield, engines flaring as they cut through the atmosphere. Cathar listened to the hum of his own vessel and tried to quiet his thoughts. He reminded himself of what he had been told in the Dominion academies. Humans were reckless, prone to mistakes, and survived only by luck. Watching them closely would reveal cracks in their methods. His report would expose those flaws, and yet as he replayed the images of their laughter and small songs, he found himself unsettled. If they were so fragile, why did they not tremble before battle? If they were so weak, why did they seem so alive in the face of danger? Hours later, when the first clash reports began to filter in from the ground, Cathar checked his notes again. The words he had written seemed hollow, as if they failed to capture what he had truly seen. He had written, "inefficient pre-battle, behavior and lack of proper silence," but those words felt dishonest. He could not explain why. His stylus hovered over the tablet as he considered adding more, yet he pulled his hand back. It was only the first day. There would be time to see what humans truly were in combat. Perhaps his early impressions would fade, and he would confirm what the Dominion always believed. But even as he set the recorder aside, the memory of their voices lingered. He could almost hear their laughter echoing in his ears, even though he knew the glass had kept the sound from reaching him. The image of them touching small objects before leaving stayed in his mind. They were not like the others he had studied. That much was already clear, and though he would not admit it aloud, Kether felt something he had not felt in years of observation: curiosity. For the first time in his duty, he wanted to know not just how they fought, but why. Kethar's vessel circled above the planet while the humans prepared for their first strike. The orbital screens gave him a perfect view of the battlefield below. The terrain was a broken stretch of ridges and valleys, scarred by weeks of bombardment. Smoke drifted from ruined structures, and the ground carried the marks of burned soil where plasma weapons had struck. To Kethar, it looked like a place that had already died, yet humans moved across it with life in every step. The Dominion observation. Crew remained silent as they monitored the signals. They had no reason to speak unless the data required correction. But Kethar's attention lingered not on numbers or graphs, but on the small figures moving below. Through magnification, he could see them arranging themselves into squads. The human's armor was lighter compared to most other species, almost fragile in design. Many of their helmets exposed part of their faces. To Kethar, it seemed careless. Protection should always come first in combat. Yet the humans wore their equipment with a kind of ease, as though it were only an extension of their bodies. He noted their constant communication. Even when they were not giving orders, they spoke. Words, gestures, and signals moved between them like a constant current. They joked, smiled, and sometimes patted one another on the back. The Dominion soldiers he had seen in past wars never behaved this way. Silence was their rule, discipline their shield. The humans' behavior seemed at first glance to be disorganized. But the longer Kethar watched, the more he began to notice patterns. Their conversations were not distractions. They were threads holding them together. They reminded one another of who they were, keeping fear from seeping too deep. When the battle began, the difference became clearer. Enemy fire struck the ridges, bursts of energy lighting up the surface. Humans dashed between cover, their movements fast and unpredictable. Kether expected them to scatter in panic, but instead they moved as though they shared a single mind. He realized the earlier chatter had forged trust. When one soldier signaled, the others reacted without hesitation. They risked themselves to pull each other forward, sometimes exposing their backs to enemy fire, something unthinkable among Dominion troops. Yet this risk did not break them. It made them faster. Kethar adjusted the recorder. He began to describe their actions. Unusual cohesion through non-standard behavior, reliance on emotional reinforcement, improvised adaptation in small unit. Tactics. His stylus scratched across the tablet, but the words still felt too mechanical for what he was seeing. The enemy soldiers fought with machines, tall, armored walkers that carried weapons heavy enough to crush squads in seconds. Other species would have retreated or waited for reinforcements. Humans did not. A team of them crawled through the mud, dragging small explosives. They attached the charges directly to the walkers' legs, sacrificing stealth for speed. When the explosion tore the machine apart, the humans rose from the smoke, coughing and laughing as though they had achieved more than survival. Kethar frowned at their strange resilience. Injuries did not stop them. A soldier with a wounded arm simply tied it tight and continued to fight with the other. Another who had lost his weapon picked up debris from the ground and used it as a shield until a squad mate threw him a spare rifle. They fought like water flowing downhill, changing shape as obstacles rose, never stopping. At one point, a group of humans became cut off, surrounded by enemy forces. Cathar leaned forward, expecting them to be destroyed. Instead, nearby squads began shifting their movements, drawing fire toward themselves. It was reckless, bordering on foolish. Yet it worked. The trapped group broke free, and the others fell, back into position. This was something Cathar could not explain with logic. They risked more than necessary, and yet it brought them all forward. The battle stretched into hours. Smoke choked the ridges and the ground became littered with wreckage. Still, the humans pressed forward. They were not faster than their enemies, nor stronger, nor better armed. Yet they did not stop. Each time they were forced back, they returned. Each time one fell, another pulled him to safety if possible. Even when victory seemed impossible, they continued to fight as if giving up had never been an option. From the safety of orbit, Cathar tried to keep his thoughts cold. His duty was to record, not to admire. But admiration seeped into him despite his will. These fragile creatures, so soft compared to the armored species of the galaxy, carried themselves as if they were made of unbreakable iron. Their strength did not come from armor or weapons. It came from something within, something that bound them to one another in ways Cathar could not name. When the last enemy forces retreated, the humans gathered again. They were covered in mud, blood, and smoke, their faces streaked with exhaustion. Yet even then, they smiled at one another. Some sat and shared water. Others helped bandage wounds. They were tired but not broken. Their laughter rose again, thin but real. Cathar leaned back in his chair, unsettled by how different they were from the others he had studied. He wrote in his report that the humans had shown unexpected levels of cohesion and resilience. But when he set his stylus down, he whispered words that would never appear in the record. They do not fight alone. They fight as one. That night, as the vessel circled in silence, Cathar replayed the images in his mind. He was supposed to be detached, nothing more than an observer. Yet the humans' voices, their movements, and their unshakable will lingered. For the first time, he feared that watching them might change him more than he was meant to admit. The next day began with silence. Cathar sat at his observation post, staring at the shifting images on the screen. The battlefield below was quiet for the moment, a strange calm before movement returned. The humans were preparing again, their voices carrying over the communication feed. Cathar listened closely. Their language was sharp and quick, but what struck him was not the words themselves but the tone. They joked, teased, and sometimes even sang. There was no fear in their voices, at least none that he could hear. When the enemy struck, it came, fast and violent. The rival species launched an overwhelming assault with heavy weapons. Fire streaked across the sky as artillery shook the ground. Cathar expected the humans to break, to scatter under the storm. He leaned forward, waiting to see them falter. But what he saw instead pulled him deeper into curiosity. The human squads did not freeze. They moved immediately, shouting warnings to one another, pulling comrades to safety. Explosions tore open the earth, yet they dashed through the chaos, weaving between fire and dust. Where other species would have stayed pinned down, humans seemed to thrive in the confusion. Their movements looked unplanned, chaotic even, but when Cathar watched carefully, he noticed the truth. Each action connected to another. One soldier distracted the enemy with fire while another circled wide. A third dragged the wounded away. Their chaos was not weakness, it was adaptation. He recorded carefully, though his hand shook slightly as he wrote. Humans show high-level improvisation under fire. Unpredictable. Difficult to map. The words did not capture the sight before him. He saw a squad trapped behind a destroyed transport. The enemy pushed forward, confident they would crush the humans quickly. Cathar prepared to note their defeat. Instead, one of the humans tore open the transport's side panel, pulled out loose wires and sparked them together. The wreck ignited, sending smoke billowing upward. Hidden in the sudden haze, the squad crawled out the other side and rejoined their unit. Cathar's eyes widened. This was not training. This was instinct. More examples came one after another. A soldier without ammunition grabbed stones from the ground and hurled them to distract enemy marksmen. Another used the broken limb of a fallen machine as a makeshift shield, charging through enemy fire. A squad out of explosives set traps using sharp debris and fragments of armor. Kethar wrote it all down, though a part of him no longer believed his report would be enough. There was something deeper here, something his language struggled to explain. The enemy grew frustrated, tightening their assault. Massive walkers advanced, their legs smashing through craters as they fired down on human positions. Kethar had seen these machines before. Against most armies, they were unstoppable. He expected the humans to retreat. Instead, he watched a small team crawl forward in the dirt, dragging charges strapped to their bodies. They should have been torn apart, yet their comrades opened fire from every direction, drawing attention away. The team reached the walker, planted the charges, and shouted for the others to pull back. The explosion tore through the machine, sending it crashing down. The humans roared in triumph, their cheers rising above the sound of destruction. Kethar's throat tightened. They were celebrating not survival, but victory against impossible odds. Even wounded, they grinned. He saw one soldier help another to his feet, blood staining both their uniforms, yet both laughing as if they had just won a game. Kethar had no words for this. His people would have considered such wasteful emotion a weakness, yet here it seemed to be their greatest strength. The battle raged for hours. Time blurred as Kethar watched humans pulled from wreckage, dragged across fire, shielded by their comrades. No one was left behind if it could be prevented. Even when retreat orders came, squads delayed leaving until the last possible moment, ensuring everyone else had made it out. Some risked everything to carry one more injured soldier back to safety. Kethar pressed his hands against the table, his chest heavy. His duty was to watch, but now he felt more than observation. He felt something close to respect, though he would not dare name it. When the clash finally slowed, smoke covered the ridges. The humans had lost many, yet their lines held. They sat together, exhausted, passing water between them. Some were silent, but others still managed to smile, still managed to joke as though laughter itself was a weapon they carried. Kethar could not look away. His screen showed men and women broken, bruised, covered in ash, yet shining with a fire that would not die. He began to write again. Humans demonstrate extreme resilience. They do not fear improvisation. They sacrifice safety for one another. Their cohesion is emotional, not structural. His hand paused. He added something he had never written before in all his years of service. They fight not as individuals, but as one body, one spirit. To underestimate them is a mistake. As the ship drifted silently in orbit, Kethar leaned back, the memory of their battle replaying in his mind. The images would not fade. The Dominion had told him humans were reckless, undisciplined, and weak, but he had seen with his own eyes that this was not true. They were reckless, yes, but it was a kind of recklessness that made them dangerous. They were emotional, yes, but it was an emotion that made them unbreakable. And as much as Kethar tried to return to the cold detachment of his duty, a truth whispered in the back of his mind. Watching them fight had awakened something in him. He was no longer sure he could look at them as mere subjects of study. The humans had shown him something rare, something unforgettable. The days that followed were heavier. The enemy had grown frustrated by their earlier failures and prepared a massive push to crush the humans once and for all. Kethar knew this by the signals coming through the observation vessel, by the movement of ships across the stars, and by the uneasy silence of the Dominion crew around him. Even without words, everyone felt the shift. The next battle would not be like the ones before. It would be larger, harsher, and far more costly. From orbit, Kethar watched the humans prepare again. Their numbers were smaller now, their faces more tired. Yet the same strange energy lingered among them. They checked weapons, adjusted armor, and joked quietly. One soldier carved a mark into the metal of his rifle, another tied a bright cloth to his arm, and a group sang softly while they gathered supplies. To Kethar, these were strange rituals, but they gave the humans strength. Where his own kind would grow silent with dread, Humans seemed to meet fear with defiance. When the enemy struck, the ground shook with the force of their bombardment. The sky burned as fire rained down. Cathar gripped the edge of his table, his eyes fixed on the magnified screens. He expected the humans to retreat immediately, but they did not. Instead, they spread out, forming defensive lines across the ridges. Their commanders shouted orders, their voices strong even over the chaos. The enemy advanced with overwhelming numbers, supported by heavy walkers and waves of soldiers. The humans fired back with everything they had, but it was not enough to hold forever. Slowly, painfully, their lines began to break. Cathar could see squads falling back, dragging their wounded, firing desperately as the enemy pushed closer. The humans were losing ground. Then came the order that made Cathar's chest tighten. The senior human commander, a woman with a sharp gaze and a calm voice, called for a full evacuation of the nearby civilian settlement. The settlement was small but filled with non-combatants, people who had been trapped when the war front moved too quickly. If the enemy reached them, none would survive. To save them, the humans would have to hold the line longer than possible. Cathar listened as the commander gave her final orders. She directed the retreat of her soldiers, sending them to cover the evacuation routes. But when her officers protested, pointing out that the enemy's advance would overrun them, she only smiled faintly. Her decision was clear. She would stay behind with a small group, holding the line long enough for the civilians to escape. Cathar felt something he had never felt before while observing war, disbelief mixed with dread. He had seen soldiers sacrifice themselves before, but it was always forced or desperate. This was different. The human commander was calm. She chose this path not out of panic, but out of will. She was ready to give her life so that others could live. On the ground, the battle grew more brutal. The commander and her small group positioned themselves in the ruins of a building overlooking the valley. They knew they could not stop the enemy, but they could delay them. Cathar watched as they fired relentlessly, drawing attention to themselves, forcing the enemy to slow their advance. Every second they held out meant another ship lifting civilians into the sky. The enemy brought heavier fire to crush them. Walls collapsed, dust filled the air, and the small group dwindled. Still, the commander fought on, shouting encouragement to those beside her. Even as the structure shook around them, they refused to abandon their post. Cathar's hands trembled over his recorder. He did not want to write what he knew would happen next. The commander called for an airstrike on her own position. Her voice was steady as she gave the coordinates, her eyes fierce with resolve. Her soldiers hesitated, but she repeated the order firmly. To Cathar, it felt unthinkable. She was choosing certain death not for glory, not for conquest, but simply to buy a little more time. From orbit, Cathar saw the strike land. The building vanished in fire and smoke, and the enemy advance stalled. The delay was enough. Civilian ships cleared the atmosphere, slipping to safety. The human commander and her team were gone, but their choice had saved hundreds of lives. For long moments, Cathar could not move. His people would never understand this. Sacrifice was seen as weakness in the Dominion. Efficiency mattered more than individual lives. Yet here was a commander who chose to give everything without hesitation because her people needed it. The thought made his chest ache in a way he had never known. The surviving soldiers retreated, battered and bleeding, but they carried with them the memory of what their commander had done. Even in their exhaustion, they walked with heads high. They had not simply lost. They had bought freedom for those who could not fight. Cathar sat back slowly, the recorder dim in his hand. He had written the facts. Commander initiated self-sacrifice to delay enemy advance, successful in protecting evacuation. But the facts were empty compared to what he felt. He closed. His eyes and the image of the human commander standing calm in the ruins refused to fade. That night, while the vessel drifted in silence, Cathar whispered words that no Dominion officer should ever say aloud. They fight with more than weapons. They fight with their hearts. And he knew then that the memory of this day would never leave him. The battlefield was quiet after the storm. Smoke rose from broken machines, craters burned faintly. and silence stretched across the ridges where the fight had been fiercest. From orbit, Keithar studied the ruins with a heavy heart. He knew what had been lost. The human commander and her team had given their lives to hold the enemy back, and though their sacrifice had saved many, the cost hung in the air like a weight. The human survivors gathered at their forward base. Keithar magnified the image until he could see their faces. They were weary, stained with ash and blood, and their movements were slow. Yet there was no despair in them. Instead, they worked together, helping one another without being asked. Some patched wounds with rough hands, others lifted broken equipment from the ground, and several carried the injured carefully to makeshift shelters. Even the smallest acts carried meaning. Keithar had observed countless species after battles. Most armies descended into silence or chaos once the fighting ended. Some abandoned their wounded without thought, while others broke into disorder and panic. The humans were different. They grieved, yes, but they grieved together. Their strength did not vanish when the battle was over. It seemed to grow deeper. One soldier with a broken arm laughed softly as a comrade teased him about how poorly he aimed during the fight. The injured man smiled despite the pain, and those around them chuckled. It was not the laughter Keithar had heard before battle, strong and defiant. This was different, softer, fragile, yet it carried the same strange power. It kept despair away. Others sang quietly while they cleaned their weapons and prepared meals. The songs were simple, with voices rough from exhaustion, but the sound reached across the base. Keithar found himself leaning closer to the screen. Listening through the translator only captured fragments of meaning. The words spoke of holding on, of not letting go, of standing together. The tone alone was enough to stir something in him. Later, as night fell over the planet, the soldiers gathered around small lights. Some shared food, passing pieces from hand to hand. Others sat with the injured, speaking to them gently so they would not feel alone. A few stared into the distance, silent tears on their cheeks. Yet when another soldier placed a hand on their shoulder, they nodded and straightened. Keithar pressed his hands against the table, unable to look away. His people would never act like this. In the Dominion, weakness was hidden, pain was ignored, and loss was treated as a number in a report. Yet here, humans did not hide their grief. They carried it together, and somehow, it gave them strength. He remembered the commander who had chosen to stay behind. Her face lingered in his mind as if carved into his thoughts. Her soldiers remembered her too. They spoke of her around the fire, sharing stories of her sharp wit and her steady courage. They smiled as they remembered her, even laughed at small details, and Keithar realized they were keeping her alive in memory. The Dominion would have erased such things, but humans held on tightly to those they lost. Keithar tried to write his report. He began with the facts. The losses, the damage, the successful evacuation of civilians. He added notes about their continued ability to fight despite exhaustion. But again, the words felt empty. The truth could not be captured with simple phrases. He stopped writing, staring instead at the image of the humans sitting together. They were scarred, broken in body but not in spirit. He had no language for that. As the hours passed, the soldiers rested. Some leaned against each other as they slept, using shoulders as pillows. Others kept watch quietly, eyes sharp despite fatigue. It struck Keithar that even in rest they never left one another alone. They shared their burdens, dividing pain until it was bearable. Keithar wondered what it would feel like to be among them, to sit by their fires and hear their laughter, not through a screen, but with his own ears. The thought startled him. He was an observer, nothing more. He was not meant to feel curiosity like this, yet he could not stop it. Something about them called to him, something he did not fully understand. When dawn came, the humans rose slowly. Their faces showed sorrow, but also determination. They prepared for another day, checking weapons, adjusting gear, and sharing one last quiet meal before setting out. Keithar realized that though they carried scars from yesterday, Those scars did not weaken them. Instead, they seemed to bind them tighter together. He finished his report with one last note written in small script as if he hoped no one else would notice. Humans carry their pain as strength. They do not let loss destroy them. They transform grief into willpower. When he set his stylus down. Cathar leaned back in his chair. His eyes were tired, but his mind was restless. He could not erase the images from his thoughts. The commander's last stand, the soldiers' laughter through pain, the soft songs in the night. His duty was only to watch, but he knew now that watching was no longer simple. What he had seen had touched him in ways he could not deny. As the vessel drifted silently above the scarred world, Cathar whispered words meant for no one but himself. They are more than soldiers. They are something else entirely. And though he did not know what battles still waited below, he knew one truth for certain: the humans would keep fighting, and no matter how much they lost, they would not break. Cathar's return to Dominion Command was colder than the battlefields he had left behind. The halls of the station were polished metal, shining with efficiency, without a single mark of life or feeling. No laughter echoed here. No quiet songs softened the silence. Officers walked with clipped steps, voices kept low and sharp. For most of his career, Cathar had found comfort in this order, but after weeks among the humans, the stillness felt empty. He carried his records tightly in his hands. His reports were filled with details: maps of battles, lists of casualties, descriptions of enemy tactics. The Dominion demanded precision, and Cathar had always delivered. But this time, something gnawed at him. He knew what he had written did not fully tell the truth. When he entered the command chamber, his superiors waited. Tall, robed figures stood around the central table, their faces unreadable. One of them gestured for him to begin. "Your observations," the senior officer said, voice cold and formal. Cathar activated the display. Images of the humans appeared in the air. Squads moving through smoke, soldiers hauling each other to safety. The commander who had chosen to hold the line. His voice was steady as he began his report. He spoke of human tactics, of their improvisation in battle, of their strange cohesion built on trust and emotion. He described their sacrifices, their refusal to abandon even a single comrade. At first, the officers listened in silence. But when Cathar mentioned the commander who had ordered a strike on her own position, a murmur spread around the table. One officer frowned. "Wasteful," he said. "A commander should never throw away her life. Inefficient." Cathar's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, but he forced his voice calm. The act delayed the enemy long enough for hundreds of civilians to escape. The sacrifice had purpose. Another officer shook his head. Purpose born of weakness. To value civilians above victory is flawed. Cathar felt heat in his chest. He had never contradicted his superiors before, but now silence felt unbearable. "With respect, you are wrong. The humans fight for more than victory. They fight for one another. That is their strength." The chamber grew still. Eyes turned toward him, some sharp with disapproval, others unreadable. Cathar lowered his gaze quickly. He had gone too far, spoken too openly. He tried to recover by continuing his report, focusing on tactical points and measurable details. He spoke of how humans adapted faster than predicted, how they turned chaos into opportunity, how their emotional bonds created unpredictable strategies. He warned that underestimating them would be dangerous. He wrote these words into the final report as carefully as he could, masking his respect beneath the language of analysis. When he finished, silence lingered. Finally, the senior officer nodded slowly. "We will record your findings. You are dismissed." Cathar bowed and left the chamber, but his steps were heavy. His words had been accepted but not understood. He knew his report had been stripped of what truly mattered. He had written about tactics, but not about the fire he had seen in human eyes. He had noted their cohesion, but not the laughter that carried them through fear. He had recorded their sacrifice, but not the beauty of it. Alone in his quarters, Cathar opened his private copy of the report. He read the words again, and they felt hollow. His hand moved, and he began to write something new. Not for the Dominion, not for official record, but for himself. He wrote about the commander who had smiled as she gave her final order. He wrote about soldiers singing in the night, their voices rough but unbroken. He wrote about the way they carried each other, never leaving anyone behind. As he wrote, he realized something had changed in him. He was no longer just an observer. He had been touched by what he saw. His duty had ended, but the memory remained, and it was a memory he could not let go. The next day, when he passed through the halls of the station, he noticed how lifeless they seemed. His fellow officers moved with precision but no warmth. He thought of the humans, scarred, weary, yet alive in a way the Dominion would never understand. For the first time, Cathar felt a quiet distance between himself and his own people. He told no one about his private writings. He locked them away, safe from the eyes of command. But each night, when silence pressed in too heavily, he opened them again and read the words. They reminded him of the battlefield, of the faces he had seen, of the voices that had carried through smoke and fire. The Dominion would remember humans as reckless, emotional, and inefficient. Cathar knew better. They were reckless, yes, but in ways that turned battles. They were emotional, yes, but in ways that made them unbreakable. And inefficiency, as the Dominion called it, was the very thing that made them stronger than any machine. Cathar had delivered his report. His duty was complete. But deep inside, he knew that what he had given his superiors was only half the truth. The full truth lived only in him, carried like a flame he could not put out. And though he did not speak it aloud, one thought returned to him again and again. The humans were dangerous, not because of their weapons, but because of their spirit. And if the galaxy ever forgot that, it would pay dearly. Time passed, but the memory stayed with Cathar like a mark that could not fade. He returned to his duties, wearing the same uniform and following the same rules. Yet nothing felt the same. The Dominion saw him as a loyal officer, calm and precise, but within him was a quiet unrest. Whenever he looked at the stars beyond the station's wide windows, he remembered the battles where humans had stood, fragile in body, but unshaken in will. The Dominion's leaders called humans inefficient, unpredictable, dangerous in their defiance. But Cathar had seen another truth. He had seen them fight not only with weapons, but with hearts. He had seen them laugh in the face of fear, grieve openly for their losses, and rise again even when broken. These images lived in his mind, stronger than any official report could capture. One evening, Cathar stood in the observation deck. Ships moved silently in the void, their lights blinking like distant stars. A fellow officer approached, standing beside him. The officer spoke without looking at him. "You saw much on your assignment. Tell me, are humans as reckless as the records say?" Cathar hesitated. He could have repeated the official words, reckless, emotional, dangerous, but his mouth refused to form them. Instead, he said quietly, "They are different. Reckless, yes, but not without reason. They risk themselves for others. They fight for more than orders. They fight for life itself." The officer frowned and gave him a puzzled glance. "Strange creatures. No wonder they bring so much chaos." Then, with a shrug, he left. Cathar stayed behind, watching the stars. He realized that even if his words were ignored, even if no one else understood, he could not let go of what he had seen. It was not just chaos. It was something deeper, something the Dominion did not yet have a name for. At night, when he returned to his quarters, he opened his private writings. The pages had grown into a book, filled with memories of humans in battle. He read them slowly, tracing each line as though the words could bring the moments back to life. The commander who had chosen sacrifice, the soldiers who had carried one another through fire, the songs they had sung to keep fear away. Each page carried their spirit. Sometimes, He wondered why it mattered so much. He was not human. Their ways were not his. And yet he could not stop himself from remembering. The memory had become part of him, reshaping how he saw everything. Weeks later, Kethar was called again to attend a briefing. The Dominion had new plans, new campaigns to control another region of space. The leaders spoke with calm certainty, discussing numbers, supply lines, strategies. They spoke of planets as if they were nothing more than points on a map. As Kethar listened, he felt a quiet unease. He thought of the humans who would soon stand against this cold advance. He thought of their stubborn resistance, their refusal to be erased. The Dominion saw them as an obstacle, but Kethar knew they were something else, a force that could not be easily measured or broken. When the meeting ended, he returned to his quarters. He sat alone in silence, the weight of choice pressing on him. His duty was to observe, to report, to serve the Dominion without question. Yet part of him wondered if his duty was something more now. Perhaps his true duty was to remember, to keep alive the truth that others chose to ignore. He imagined a time far in the future, when stories of humans would spread beyond records and reports. He imagined younger officers hearing not only of their recklessness but of their courage. He imagined the galaxy slowly realizing that the strength of humans did not lie only in their weapons, but in their spirit. Kethar closed his eyes, and for a moment he could hear again the rough voices of soldiers singing through smoke and fire. He could see the commander's steady gaze as she gave her final order. He could feel the unyielding bond that tied them together. The Dominion might never understand. But Kethar did, and that understanding had changed him forever. He did not know what future awaited the humans or himself. Perhaps war would continue and many more would fall. Perhaps peace would one day come, fragile but real. Whatever the outcome, Kethar knew one thing with certainty. The humans would endure. They would keep fighting, keep laughing, keep sacrificing, because that was who they were. And as long as he lived, Kethar would carry that memory, not as a duty forced upon him, but as a truth he had chosen for himself, a truth too powerful to be forgotten. So when he looked out at the endless stars once more, he whispered softly, words meant for no one but himself. I was sent to watch them in combat, but what I saw was something greater, something I cannot forget. The stars gave no answer, but deep inside Kethar felt at peace. He knew his memory would remain, unbroken and alive, as long as he chose to keep it.